Michael Greyeyes stars in the film Wild Indian and television series Rutherford Falls. I'm at Noble Gold Derby, and I wanted to ask you, Michael, how do you like when roles come along? What are the ones that speak to you?
It's a great question. I think one of the things that's really appealed to me in the last few years are roles that have real complexity and dimensionality to them. Um, also, I think it's really important that the kinds of characters I play, which are often indigenous characters, are empowered. I think I think characters who are powerless or don't have agency don't appeal to me. So I'm delighted that I've been afforded the opportunity to play characters that are powerful.
Now, you've been nominated for two Gotham Awards, which is very exciting. Congratulations
Thank you.
for both of those roles, for lead performer in a film for Wild Indian and for performance in a new series for Rutherford Falls. Um, is there one you want to win more than the other?
um, no, I'm hugely honored that the Gotham Awards, recognized my work and the work of my colleagues. I'm so excited about both projects, and it's interesting that in the pandemic year, 2020, both of these projects, I had a chance to work on these projects, and they were released, this past year, 2021. And for me, they're highlights of my career. Wild Indian, of course, is a crime thriller, brutal sort of storytelling in the sense of its truth and power. And Rutherford Falls, of course, is a comedy, and it celebrates Native joy. So in a way, it's sort of like an apple and an orange. They're completely different, but I love them both.
Mm. And I guess there's like the biggest differences, as you say, are the sort of tones and the sort of like go from dark thriller to comedy, and also like a film to a television series where the story's told in sort of slightly different ways in terms of the pacing and things. Uh, do you have to approach those roles very differently, or as an actor, is there sort of a commonality to how you approach those characters in those roles?
I think it's both of those things, to be honest. Uh, for example, with Wild Indian, this is an indie project, so we made it in 17 days. It was fast and furious. The beauty of independent filmmaking. We were, moving through setups really quickly. I brought my own clothes to augment, the costume designer's choices. I think Kate did the same thing. We knew we were dealing with limitations in terms of budget and resource, but of course that makes the work that's produced in those kinds of circumstances so beautiful. Everyone's coming together. With Rutherford Falls, of course, this is a new show by Peacock and Universal, and so a much higher budget, bigger cast, more locations, and but even in that sense, working on a series, episodic television is actually quite grueling. So we shot for nearly 4 months. So really, in every way, the way of working was quite different. But again, these two characters, I play a character named Makwa, Michael Peterson in Wild Indian, and I play Terry Thomas in Rutherford Falls. And as different as these men are, they're both ambitious. They're both powerful. They're confident and smart. So there are similarities, but of course, the story and who these men are in many ways polar opposites.
Mm. Let's talk about Rutherford Falls for a minute. And you play, as you say, Terry in that, and we learn more about Terry as the series goes on, and there are more layers sort of revealed, and we sort of get to understand him in a way we probably don't in the pilot episode where when we first meet him. What was that like to sort of sort of slowly reveal that character, and particularly that episode where we really get to see more from Terry's perspective than we had previously, where it's more seeing the other character's perspective of him.
Yeah, that was a beautiful sort of progression, like the arc that I was allowed to explore, through Terry and the series. We're introduced to Terry. We know that he's, an imposing character. He looms large in Regan's life, which is the character played by Janice Schmieding, who's, extraordinary in the role. And we sort of get a sense like, oh, this is a powerful man. People are kind of scared of him. He's like low key, terrifying, but charming. And we're like, who is this guy? And so questions are raised about who he is. And then all of a sudden, episode 4, which is the title is Terry Thomas. It's named after his character. We get to drop into his life and his backstory and why he became the man that we see. And for me, that was an incredible episode. It was an incredible journey to dive into our characters deeply as I was able to. Rupinder Gill was our writer for that episode, and she, crafted an extraordinary series of scenes and monologues. So it was beautiful. It was in a way, in an ensemble piece like Rutherford Falls, I was given a chance to shine individually, and I'm so appreciative of that.
Yeah. He is like a sort of a complicated character, and I think a lot of what we see in Rutherford Falls is sort of an exploration of perspective, and from different perspectives you understand characters differently. Sort of what perspective do you hope sort of audiences take away from that show?
That's a really lovely point. I think perspective is, the raison d'etre behind why we're doing what we're doing. In our media, we've often been portrayed as sort of monolithic entities, indigenous culture. And, as you learn more about us, you realize, we are hundreds of different cultures, right? And what I love about the show is that we see these characters, as from, where they're emerging, who they're connected to. And so we actually see sort of the complexity of Native relations. How I'm with my wife and how I'm with my children is different than how I'm at work. And what that does, it allows, I think, audiences to recognize, our inherent complexity and the sort of intricacies of how we relate to each other. So for me, that's one of the great beauties of what Sierra, our showrunner, and the other writers were able to create.
Is there a challenge in representing like an Indigenous character when there are so many less Indigenous representations in the medium? Because, like, as you say, it's not monolithic. There's so many different experiences, so many different perspectives of Indigenous, but like when there's so few representations, it's hard to know what to choose there.
Yeah, it's our history in Hollywood, as Indigenous people and artists has been, it's been fraught, it's complex, and so what we're sort of in a way left with is sort of choices between this or that, which is sort of a false paradigm. It's, it's kind of a false binary. What I've always done in my career is reject the either or, and I'll go right up the middle, or I'll go around both sides. Like, for example, I've played many warriors, and it's been a joy of mine to, represent, those people from our history. But I never looked at warriors as sort of like these, alpha males, like how we see soldiers or heroes. I've always looked at them as protectors, and they're the first line of defense for families and children and our elders. So I always played warriors with that idea. So again, it's not he's not this or that. He's a complex blend of things. So that's been my career. I've been presented with choices, and I usually reject the two most obvious ones, or the 3 most obvious ones, and I'm like, I'm interested in telling different stories. I'm interested in telling a story about like uncles that I know, or men that I know, or fathers or dads that I grew up with. And so I actually find there's lots of choices to make when representing my community.
Mm. And I guess like that's sort of true of sort of any acting performance of any actor, is sort of trying to find something that hasn't been shown before, trying to find a
Yes,
new
yes.
perspective. Mm.
And
Uh, yeah.
there's been so few really complex portrayals that actually I find there's a rich sort of that's a rich area to mine and to explore.
Mm. In Wild Indian, your performance of Makwa is like again, very different perspective, very different sort of approach to life than Terry. Is there a particular scene or moment in that film that was sort of you had to make a particular choice as an actor?
Mm. There were a number. There were a number. The writer-director Lyle Mitchell Corbine created this extraordinary story, this incredible script. I remember after I received the script, I was just floored by, you know, the risks he was taking. So there were scene after scene where I was like, I can't wait to explore that. But one of the most beautiful scenes that I was able to work on was the scene with Chaske, who played Tedo in the film. It's a story about these two men and lifelong friends. They grew up together, childhood friends. And we see Tedo's path and we see Makwa's path, and it's a story about these two men and their relationship. But interestingly, in the telling of the film, there's only one scene where they're actually on screen together, right? And it's the scene where Tedo, finds Makwa after many, many years, and they confront each other in Makwa's apartment. And I watched the film just recently over the weekend at the Red Nation Film Festival, and it's the first time I had a chance to see it on screen. And I was really stunned by how economical that scene was. The things that Chaske and I were trying to do in terms of power relationship and trust and manipulation. It's a beautifully conceived scene, it's beautifully written, and Chaske was so masterful in that scene. It's something I think I'll always be proud of how that turned out.
Mm. There's like a real you can disagree if you want, but I feel like there's a real coldness to your character in the film. How do you sort of tap into that as an actor and sort of empathize with his perspective and that kind of role when it is quite a cold one?
The thing with Makwa is that how he behaves, like the behaviors he demonstrates, on screen, that violence, that rage, that seeming coldness, are all things that are, in some ways quite shocking. But when I looked at how, the character was built from his youth, I made an early choice in that all his behaviors are masks. Everything he does as an adult is a mask that's covering something else. And what he's covering is his inability to confront that act of violence that shaped his life. And so, he committed this terrible and brutal act of violence when he was a young man. And almost immediately, he started to close off how he might respond emotionally to what he did. And that stunted him. That stunted him emotionally. So, I think the character sometimes been described as psychopath, sociopathic, but he's not. He's actually a deeply feeling person that if he was asked to confront emotionally what he had done, it would devastate him. So these layers of coldness and brutality and ambition are actually masks that he's adopted, first of all, to succeed, but also to avoid his own personal reckoning. And I think by the end of the film, we see the cracks start to appear in those disguises. And so for me, it was a real challenge to be able to present, that hard exterior, but at the same time balance it with essentially a teenage boy that was unable to move forward emotionally.
The I guess also, Michael, actors wear masks, and that's a big part of sort of what your job is doing. Are actors often sort of trying to hide confronting with things that are real in their life?
I think many are. It's actors lead a public life, and I think many are hiding in plain sight. For me, to dive into this character was pretty harrowing, personally. I remain, disturbed by the process, that I had to undertake to understand this person. His violence towards women was, really disconcerting. To take those kinds of journeys is difficult as an actor. And although I loved doing the work and working with Lyle and Kate and Jesse and Lisa and Chaske, it really affected me. It affected me for a long time afterwards. And I'm glad that it exists. I'm glad that the document exists as this artwork. But to go there again would be something I'd be just terrified to do.
Was it harrowing to watch it again over the weekend? And do you go through it again a bit, or?
Oh, I'm whenever I watch a movie, I think I'm lucky in the sense that after watching it a few times, I can divorce myself from watching myself. Yeah. But I see very little of my own being in Makwa. He really is a creation. I really did craft something outside of myself. But that being said, the film scares me. I've often described the film as like a piano wire around the audience's neck, and Lyle just tightens it and tightens it and tightens it. I'm stunned by the violence. Like that scene with Chaske, and I jump, and I'm terrified whenever I watch it. So yeah, it's harrowing to watch, but it's beautifully made. I'm so proud of it.
You're also sort of a teacher, I think, at the theater at University of York, or York University. And Michael, I guess as sort of an actor, what is the sort of most important thing you've learnt?
I love teaching. I've been associate professor at York University in the Department of Theater since 2004, and teaching and being surrounded by young artists has really shaped my life in profound ways. I think the one thing I tell them is that we are storytellers, and that's certainly coming from my own cultural traditions. We're storytellers. Sometimes we tell stories through paint. Sometimes we tell stories through image. For actors, we do it through movement and voice and words. And just how we even change our bodies. Like I lost 35 pounds to play Makwa. So, there's a beauty to what we do. There's kind of poetry to committing to a life that is not our own, and that we try to honor in some way.
Oh, very nice. Michael, thanks so much for talking with us today. Actually, firstly, just to finish off, do you have a favorite story? As someone who's a storyteller? It can be a film or a
I love stories that take me to places where I don't want to go personally. Like, for example, I love the Safdie brothers. I think they tell stories like, I don't want to be in their worlds, but I love to visit them as a viewer. People like Jeff Barnaby blow my mind. The stories he tells. So Yeah, no, I'm a fan. I'm a fan before I was ever an actor.
Yeah. Well, Michael, thanks so much for chatting with us today. All the best of luck with the Gotham Awards for both Rutherford Falls and Wild Indian, and all the other awards that are coming up on the awards circuit. People watching this interview can go to goldderby.com, where you can make your award predictions and watch other interviews with award contenders.